What's up, y'all? This is episode number 2 of the Sovereign Individual Podcast. As I said in episode 1, I would offer fair warning for any episodes with excessive language, and this is one of those episodes. Talking about the possibility of war gets me really riled up, so there's considerable language in this episode. Feel free to avoid it if you don't like that kind of thing. Also want to once again thank Flavor Aid for providing the intro music that you're about to hear. They've got their EP release party at Stubbs on May 31st, coming up here in Austin, Texas, and their latest track, Ghosting Me, is available on all streaming services. Thanks, y'all, and enjoy episode 2. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Sovereign Individual Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Guerra. Today we are going to be talking about Venezuela. I'm sure everybody is at least aware of a situation occurring there. You may not know all the details of exactly what's going on or how this situation came to be, but it's pretty being talked about a lot right now in the news, mainstream media, Twitter, everywhere you kind of turn to. Politicians are all talking about the situation in Venezuela, and it appears as if the United States government is once again looking to involve itself in the affairs of Latin America, to the shock of nobody that pays attention, that the United States would try to involve ourselves in something once again. It's been the kind of standard operating procedure of the United States government to involve itself in coups in Central and South America ever since pretty much the end of the 40s, early 50s, with the Truman Doctrine is kind of what really started it. It was an excuse to combat communism was the reason given. Truman Doctrine basically saying that the United States had the authority to intervene in any of the Americas, North, South, and Central. Any countries there, the United States had the right to intervene in, and to devastating effects to most of the countries involved. The United States has a sordid history of involving itself in supporting coups in these countries and overthrowing democratically elected governments in order to install a lot of times dictators, friendly dictators, right-wing leaning dictators in these countries in the name of combating communism or socialism or what have you. And it's a incredibly problematic type of foreign policy to employ, and it's incredibly frustrating to see it bubbling up again. It's a very similar tactic and policy that we've been using in the Middle East, even as far back as almost as far back as we've been. The Truman Doctrine goes. We overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran, and instead installed a Shah, a dictator, into Iran, and we've seen where that's gotten us. We've seen where intervention within the Middle East in countries and where supporting coups has gotten us there as well. And so we're gonna get into all of that in this podcast and kind of go over things that are being said and things that are incredibly frustrating about this whole situation and what's going on. So kind of obviously it's being talked about nonstop, so that's a big reason why I chose to dedicate this episode to Venezuela, as opposed to kind of maybe diving into some specific philosophical idea regarding individual rights or anything like that. Obviously, that we're going to get into where individual rights and kind of the theme of this podcast plays a role into this. But it was on my mind already, and I was thinking about doing an episode. And then yesterday, I attended a protest, Hands Off Venezuela protest, at the at the Capitol here in Austin, Texas. And it was sparsely attended. Maybe, I think when it got to its biggest, it got up to around 30 people or so. It was a very interesting protest to be a part of. I was there, as a representative of libertarians in the liberty movement, and I was probably the only person with a favorable view of capitalism that was in attendance there. It skewed heavily socialist and heavily anti-capitalism. There's a lot of rhetoric there that I wouldn't personally agree with or personally espouse to regarding capitalism and the dangers of it, in the way that it was portrayed by these certain socialist groups. But so the kind of the approach of at least the majority of the people that were there was more of a anti-interventionist, anti-U.S. involvement, due to the fact that in the basis of supporting socialism and supporting Maduro and the regime there, and the kind of blaming U.S. sanctions and economic sanctions for the fall of Venezuela, as opposed to the political philosophy of socialism. And that was kind of the main reason that a lot of people were there, which obviously, if you know me at all, and as we get more into this podcast, you'll realize that's wholeheartedly against my beliefs and the way I feel about things. However, I think it's prudent for us in 2019, in the current political climate in the United States, to not shy away from issues in which we have agreement on the best course of action, with people that we vehemently disagree with on probably most everything else. There's probably very few things that I would be able to agree with most of the people that were there at that protest. And we also didn't agree necessarily on the reason for wanting the U.S. to stay out of Venezuela. In a lot of ways, we agreed in anti-interventionist policy, the blood that we've already spilled in Latin America, and the innocent lives that have already been lost, in the past 60, 70 plus years of American intervention in those countries. So we agreed there. We agreed that it's definitely not any sort of idealistic or humanitarian or trying to make the world a better place. Is in no way, shape, or form is that the reason that the U.S. government is looking to involve itself in this situation. You need only look at why. It may be a question that a lot of people are asking, and it's fair because it's kind of come out of nowhere seemingly, and I'm sure a lot of people are curious as to why exactly is the United States interested in this? Why are we so concerned with Venezuela and what's occurring there, and the quote-unquote humanitarian crisis that's going on there, but not Brazil, which is experienced an equal, if not greater, economic downturn in a lot of ways, and has experienced incredible government corruption and mismanagement that has led to absolute turmoil in that country, economically as well. And the easiest thing to point to, and the main reason that the U.S. is choosing to get involved and is so concerned when it comes to Venezuela is plain and simple oil. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. It surpassed Saudi Arabia earlier this decade for the most oil reserves in the world, and those are quantifiable oil reserves that can be, they're proven oil reserves, I think is the term that are used. So this isn't some hypothetical, or this wasn't bravado expressed during the Chavez regime that they had all this oil and they were claiming to have far more than they actually have. These are proven reserves that they have and that they have the most of in the world. So there's definitely a economic incentive as far as oil goes, and a resource incentive as far as oil goes for the United States to get involved. So, whenever something like this is occurring and it seems kind of weird, there's usually, you just got to dig a little bit and you can kind of parse out, oh, okay, it starts to make sense now a little bit more as to why all of a sudden this country that's going through humanitarian crisis should receive, why the United States government wants to intervene through military force as opposed to the countless, Yemen. There's a humanitarian crisis going on in Yemen. A couple 100,000 people have died, but it's being, the genocide is being perpetuated by Saudi Arabia, which is a U.S. ally. So, we can't get involved there, and we have a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, and they're one of the highest oil producing countries in the world, and I think they're number 2 on the oil reserves list, I believe, behind Venezuela. If I recall, it's like I don't think, because Venezuela just passed up Saudi Arabia, and I don't think the next closest one was maybe Canada or someone like that, and they weren't even they weren't anywhere near Saudi Arabia. So it's kind of you just kind of got to look at it a little bit deeper whenever, especially when the reasoning given for wanting to intervene in a situation is some sort of noble moral obligation that the United States has to this situation. Anytime they really start spewing something like that, there's something deeper going on there, and some ulterior motive for involving the United States into that situation. So, I went to the protest, and again, there was a lot of things that I would disagree with. There was a lot of pro-Maduro language, and, well, not necessarily a lot. There was some pro-Maduro language, a lot of hesitance to say anything remotely negative about Maduro, which I kind of understand, because that's not necessarily the time and place for it when you're talking about that. And so that was kind of something. There was somebody during the protest that got on the megaphone and was talking about how the Maduro regime isn't an illegitimate government. They were elected through fair and impartial elections, that there were outside observers from the international community that observed the elections to make sure that everything was on the up and up. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I know how flawed our own election system is, and how much buffoonery goes on with the United States election. So I'm not under the impression that it was some pure election, that there was no seediness or shadiness that went on with it. However, Chavez was a very popular president, and I have a lot of qualms with him, but I can say that he was a good politician, which isn't a compliment, but he was good at playing the game, and therefore had a very high approval rating. So it doesn't surprise me that Maduro would have been elected fairly easily as his successor, following in attempting to follow in his footsteps. So. I don't think it was any such case of Maduro, stealing the election or any sort of shadiness going on. So I can agree with that. Where, yeah, it's a duly elected regime and administration that's currently sitting in power. But then the gentleman went on to say that because of that, we needed to support Maduro and not. I guess I can't remember exactly what he was saying. It was support Maduro. I think he was saying not to criticize or come out against. And that I don't agree with in any way, shape, or form. I think it's entirely possible to be anti-intervention in Venezuela, anti-military action in Venezuela, anti-possible war in Venezuela, and still be like, nah, Maduro's a piece of shit too. Like, this isn't an endorsement of him or what he's done or socialist ideals. I think I wholeheartedly believe that socialism is one of the worst ideologies that has ever been brought upon the earth, and the amount of damage and death that it's caused has been catastrophic. And you look to the 20th century alone, and what was done there. And so no, it's not I don't feel like those things are not they don't have to be mutual to be anti-war and then therefore pro-Maduro. I would love nothing more than to see the Venezuelan people rise up and overthrow Maduro and get him out of there. But that is not the place nor the job of the United States to evolve itself in that. That's strictly, this is talking about self-determination with the people of Venezuela. They are sovereign individuals. Name of the podcast. They are sovereign individuals that are existing. They have their own form of government. They're sovereign as individuals themselves, as every single person on the face of the earth is. But there's also the sovereignty of that nation, regardless of how I feel about governments and about different states and how they exist, and what I would prefer governments to look like. The fact of the matter is that it is a sovereign nation that has a right to self-determine how it's going to move forward. And so, to the audacity of the United States government to claim that they have some sort of moral obligation to involve themselves in the self-determination of another country is abhorrent and dangerous. And it's led us to, our foreign policy is in shambles, and a lot of it is due to this kind of thinking. And so, this is a Venezuelan problem, and it needs a Venezuelan solution by the Venezuelan people, and the United States needs to 100% completely stay out of this situation. Again, I'd love nothing more than to see the Venezuelan people rise up, overthrow the Maduro government, draft a new constitution, install a new government, however they want to do it. That's their prerogative, and that's what I want to see more than anything. Is that's their choice as to how they want to move forward and how they want to proceed. And if they choose not to, and they choose to let Maduro remain in power and continue with this socialist experiment and see how much worse it can get, that's their right as well. But at the end of the day, it's incredibly frustrating and sickening to see the way in which this situation is being portrayed by people within the United States government. So let's see. There's quite a few different individuals. So I guess we'll start with the less infuriating. So probably gonna start cussing here pretty soon when I talk about this, but we'll start. So Bernie Sanders was catching a lot of flack today for tweeting out about the situation, and so I want to pull that up real quick because I just don't want to paraphrase, especially with something like Twitter where I can pull it up easily, and so he said. The people of Venezuela are enduring a serious humanitarian crisis. The Maduro government must put the needs of its people first, allow humanitarian aid into the country, and refrain from violence against protesters. So that in and of itself isn't problematic. That language that he used in describing the situation, it sounds like a good sentiment to have. Regarding the situation, not wanting to see violence against protesters, wanting to see humanitarian aid get in. The problem with allowing the humanitarian aid to get in is a lot of times, especially if it's humanitarian aid coming from the United States, there's going to be a lot of weapons in there because we're trying, I always say we, it's just kind of a habit. I'm trying to kick it. I'll say we a lot when referring to actions of the United States, even though I wholeheartedly disagree with a lot of them. It's just kind of something you kind of grow up doing that, and it's a tough habit to kick. I'm trying to kick it. So when the United States sends government, or it sends quote unquote humanitarian aid to into situations like this, a lot of times it's also includes weapons to arm the rebels or the opposing government, to arm the people enacting the coup, whatever it is. There's usually weapons that go along with it, especially when it comes to Latin America. This is kind of a standard operating procedure and MO of the United States government when it comes to this. So we'll get more into that here in just a second. But so again, what Bernie said wasn't in and of itself necessarily bad. The problem with it is that it's the type of language that's being used by the Trump administration and by corporate media in an attempt to legitimize the idea of U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. And so when you're tweeting a sentiment like that, you're not, the problem is that it's not blatantly coming out and saying that the U.S. should not intervene militarily, and that language and that type of sentiment is what's being used as a justification for U.S. intervention into Venezuela. So I know he was taking some heat for that. I don't think that was necessarily what his intention was, but it's I would have preferred to have seen a politician of his stature come out a lot more vehemently anti-military intervention, which I haven't really seen from Bernie in any way. So I can't say for sure. I don't want to speak out of turn or try to guess as to which side he falls on or whether or not he would support it, military intervention. But I haven't seen anything specifically anti-interventionist, at least not in the same. Tulsi Gabbard, who is a compatriot of Bernie's, and they get along well, and they have a lot of common things. And I believe she campaigned with him back in 2016. She's been very outspoken about her feelings on the U.S. remaining out of any sort of military entanglement in Venezuela. So I just wish that we were seeing that more from somebody like Bernie, who's got a much bigger following and a much bigger, kind of platform. He's got a bully pulpit to speak from. And okay, so now let's get to the really frustrating one. Probably going to get pretty angry here talking about this one. So, Mr. Marco Rubio, failed presidential nominee in the Republican Party, loser of the primaries, the Republican 2016 primary, tweeted out today, right around noon Central Time. And I don't even think that matters. I don't know why I brought that up. But no text in this tweet, just two pictures. One picture showing Gaddafi sitting on what looks like some sort of golden throne chair looking thing. He's got blue sunglasses on, a white blazer, a green shirt underneath, and he's smiling, looking off camera, looking off somewhere out of frame, and smiling at somebody. And then the next picture is a still frame from the video of when Gaddafi was murdered in the street. So he's got blood all over his shirt, blood covering the entire left side of his face. He obviously looks disoriented. There's people in the background screaming, it appears. And so that's all that he tweeted out. Obviously meant to be a threat to Maduro, as in this is the fate that awaits you, and this is what we gosh, I'm really trying to stop saying it. This is what the United States government does to people, to leaders that don't toe the line, and I just saw this. I didn't even normally something like that. I'll tweet out and tell them some choice words about where they can put that tweet or something like that. But this one just made me so angry that I didn't even retweet out or quote tweet it or anything like that. It's just. This is that's one of the most asinine things I've seen in regards to this whole Venezuelan situation. So for those, I feel like most people probably know, but maybe not. This may just be something that more libertarian or people within the liberty movement talk about specifically. But So Libya, the United States intervened in Libya to overthrow Gaddafi during the Obama administration. It was specifically in 2013, I believe, when we overthrew Gaddafi. No, 2011. Yeah, it was 2011 when it occurred. I don't know why I thought 2013. Anyway, so the United States intervened, and Muammar Gaddafi was a dictator, kind of in the same vein as like a Saddam Hussein type character. Not a great guy, obviously, in any way, shape, or form. Pretty piece of shit human being. Tons of human rights violations. The type of person that would kill political dissidents. All that kind of stuff. So, and by no means is this an endorsement of Gaddafi or what he's doing. Much in the same way of my anti-war stance is not an endorsement of Maduro and what he's doing. But let's talk about what happened. So Gaddafi is overthrown. He's dragged into the street and sodomized to death in the middle of the street with a bayonet. And he was shot multiple times. I believe he was even shot in the head, or maybe there was just there was a wound, possibly to the head. I think that maybe what that picture is showing with the blood all coming down. But so brutally murdered in the middle of the street. No sort of trial or anything like that occurred. Even Saddam Hussein was able to stand trial. He was able to be executed by the Iraqi people. And that's not this is in no way, shape, or form an endorsement of the war in Iraq, because that was awful too. But just to clarify that, I prefer even horrible piece of shit dictators stand trial and be made to be accountable for what they've done in a court setting, and be found guilty that way, as opposed to just being sodomized to death in the middle of a street. But so that occurs. And Libya at the time was one of the most economically sound nations in Africa. I think it was the best economy in Africa at the time of Gaddafi's death. And then, lo and behold, civil war breaks out because there's a power vacuum now that exists since the U.S. decided to get itself involved and support this coup. And then brutal civil war breaks out. The country is completely in shambles now, and we have open air slave markets in Libya. This is something that's celebrated. It was celebrated by Hillary Clinton. She laughed about it. Saying her famous quote, "We came." What was it exactly? "We came, we saw, he died," I believe is what she said, and she was laughing about it, and him being sodomized to death in the middle of a street. And the fact that Marco Rubio, are you kidding me that you would hold up an example like Libya as something that we should in any way strive to recreate that situation, regardless of whether, regardless of what exactly it is that he's trying to say with this tweet. If he's just specifically talking about Maduro being executed the way that Gaddafi was, which again is a batshit insane example to make anyway. But then just look at what happened to Libya to see that would be a horrible. As bad as things are in Venezuela right now, at least they don't have fucking open air slavery. That's something. It's not like, as somebody who really deeply cares and is deeply passionate about the ideas of liberty and freedom, the idea of slavery really gets me going, really gets me upset and angry, and the fact that it now exists in the open in Libya as a direct result of U.S. intervention into the situation is so infuriating. And that this piece of shit Marco Rubio would draw any sort of comparison to what happened there as to something that we should strive to do again in Venezuela, just shows what a complete asshat he is, why he'll never be president, and why he got his ass thoroughly kicked by Trump in the 2016 primaries, and I'm glad he did. And he's rightfully getting ripped apart by people on all sides of the political spectrum for that tweet. It's an awful tweet, and he's an idiot. But, yeah, so let's not repeat the same mistakes that we did with Libya. Let's not get involved where we don't need to be involved. It's absolutely insane to think that the United States hasn't learned its lesson about involving itself in affairs that has nothing to do with and has no business being involved in. And it's how many countries do we have to completely destroy before we learn this damn lesson? How many lives? How many innocent lives of civilians in these countries do we have to sacrifice? How many women and children in these other countries do we have to sacrifice before the United States government learns this lesson? And then how many American lives? How many citizens do we have to send over to fight in these idiotic bullshit wars that we have no reason being involved in the first place? And it's middle America that these are your sons and daughters that are going to fight in these wars. It's not these piece of shit politics. Marco Rubio's not going to fight in this fucking war. His children aren't going to go fight in this fucking war. He's going to laugh about it in his bullshit office in Washington, D.C. and joke about it with Democrats that are supporting this war as well. And they're all going to have a big fucking laugh about it. Him and the Republicans and the Trump administration and John Bolton's bitch ass. And they're all going to enjoy it. Meanwhile, middle America are going to be sending their children to die over in Venezuela for no fucking reason aside from oil. It's really frustrating that there's just no semblance of responsibility in this kind of decision making. There's no semblance of any sort of they have no skin in the game. People like Marco Rubio, they have absolutely no skin in the game. People like John Bolton. Let's talk about fucking John Bolton. John Bolton has basically decided, hey, it looks like President Trump is somewhat serious about getting less involved in the Middle East and pulling troops out of the Middle East and ending the endless wars in the Middle East. Let's shift the focus to South America because we can't stop these endless wars. We got a military industrial complex to feed, and I need to continue to have a job, and the only way that I've been able to make my way in the political sphere is by being a war-hawking piece of shit. So let's find somewhere else that we can go. Let's go to South America because, hey, we'll just start killing a different set of brown people, and it'll all be okay. And the fact that this man has a job in Washington that has anything to do with foreign affairs is disgusting in and of itself. But the language that he's using, the fact that he didn't go over to Vietnam for this summit with North Korea so that he could focus on Venezuela. No, how about you focus on not being a piece of shit that wants to just continue this cycle, this endless cycle of murder and destruction in places that the United States government has no business being in. So, John Bolton can go ahead and frig off as far as I'm concerned. I cannot stand him. And then, who else has been brought in to be involved in this decision making? Who is our special envoy to Venezuela? Elliot fucking Abrams. That's right, one of the main co-conspirators of the Iran-Contra affair. He was involved in that beautiful task and that beautiful little program and attempted coup that went on there. For those, I'm sure most people realize. I don't mean to insult your intelligence by going over what these things were, but the Iran-Contra affair occurred in the 80s during the Reagan administration. We basically sold weapons to Iran in order to then fund the Contras, who were a right-wing rebel group in Nicaragua, and they were fighting to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, which was a left-leaning socialist communist regime. And so, in order to not directly arm the Nicaraguan, the Contras rather, the United States sold weapons to Iran and then used that money to funnel into the Contras so that they could then attempt to overthrow the Sandinista government. And so Abrams admitted to he knew more than he acknowledged in his congressional testimony, and then lo and behold, he got a plea deal to 2 misdemeanor counts, and then George H.W. Bush pardoned him. So instead of facing any repercussion, and that was just the Iran-Contra affair, there was plenty more that Abrams was involved with when it comes to the Latin America. He advocated for aid to Guatemala, and let me look up his name real quick. The dictator that we were supporting, Efrain Rios Montt, who committed a genocide, found guilty of mass murder and torture of indigenous people. And so there was El Salvador as well, when it was basically so the El Salvadorian government was one that we were trying to keep in power because, again, the United States government was trying to keep in power because it was friendly and it was a non-communist regime. And because of that, Elliot Abrams lied about massacres that occurred that were carried out by the El Salvadorian government. Said that the recorded number of deaths were not credible. And said that there were likely survivors. So to say that he has a sordid track record when it comes to Latin America would be putting it lightly. Yeah, this is the guy who Trump has named as the special envoy or special representative. I don't know what the hell the damn position is. It's let me look it up. Special representative for Venezuela. So, again, another person who is completely fine with civilian deaths, so long as the correct side is the one, orchestrating the deaths and carrying them out, and the correct side is, the side that the United States government views as friendly. So, this whole situation is disgusting and frustrating, and I sincerely hope, there's a lot, a whole lot that Trump does that I disagree with and that I wholeheartedly disavow, and I think he's in a lot of ways an idiot, and in a lot of ways a horrible human being. But that being said, he did run a campaign of anti-interventionism and of the U.S. pulling out of endless wars and not starting any new ones. And it appeared for the first few years that he at least wasn't going to start any new ones. He continued on the wars that we were in, including the secret ones that the United States public wasn't even aware of, aka Niger. But it appeared as if he wasn't going to start any new ones. Then, December of 2018, we get the pullout of Syria and the pullout of 50% of the forces in Afghanistan. So now it looks like he's actually going to start the road down to non-interventionism and ending all these endless wars. Those are two things I was very supportive of, moves by Trump that I was wholeheartedly behind. And now, unfortunately, it looks like they're gearing up to start a new war, which is completely against what he campaigned on, completely against what a lot of people, I think, voted for him for. I think a lot of people see how insane these endless wars are and how unnecessary they are. So it's really disappointing to see that this is the turn that we've taken. It's really disappointing to see pieces of shit like Elliot Abrams and John Bolton put into positions of influence and power and decision making within the administration when it comes to foreign affairs. And then obviously it's disappointing and incredibly frustrating to see somebody like Marco Rubio tweet out some bullshit like that when they have no skin in the game, and he knows that he's not going to face any consequences of a failed military intervention in Venezuela. The United States does not need to involve itself in the matters of Venezuela. This is a decision and an issue and a problem for the Venezuelan people to solve, for the Venezuelan people to decide how to move forward, and is the right of the Venezuelan people to self-determine their path forward. Just as any other person on the face of the earth, they are sovereign individuals. They have a government with a constitution that is duly elected in an election, and it is the right of no other persons or state to decide when that experiment may be over. That is the choice of the Venezuelan people, and my heart goes out to them and the suffering that they've incurred as a result of the Maduro regime, and the suffering that is likely going to befall them if the United States decides to intervene with military action. So that's the Venezuela episode. Got a little bit heated. I think I was able to at least refrain from yelling. I don't think this microphone will be great at picking up yelling, so for the sake of the listeners, I'm trying to at least keep my volume down. But yeah, I got a little bit upset, as you could tell. So thanks again for listening. I appreciate it. This is the second episode of the 3 that I am all releasing on the same date to get things kicked off. So I'll see you back here for the 3rd episode, and I haven't yet decided what I'm going to talk about, so we'll probably get into something more philosophical and less current affairs type thing, and get into maybe some weird quote unquote weird libertarian belief. A lot of them can seem weird from the outside without kind of knowing what's behind them. So not quite sure what the next one will be, but you'll know sooner than I am, because you're listening to this right now. So thanks again for listening, and again, my heart goes out to the Venezuelan people, and they, just as you and I, are sovereign individuals, and they have the right to determine how their life is going to go and what direction they're going to move forward. So, see y'all soon.